the preliminary review process. The preliminary review process is one of the core processes that Gold Standard has introduced in comparison to other carbon standards. And the idea is to provide an opportunity to the project developer to assess initial eligibility of the project. It is not a certification step. It is process that simply grants a listed status on the Gold Standard Registry and provides the security for the project developer to move forward with the project. As you might remember from the project certification process, the preliminary review stage is performed by SustainCERT, which is Gold Standard certification body, and is in the very early stages when the project design is not yet complete, but the project has been planned and the planned impacts and the planned interventions are discussed with stakeholders and have undergone a safeguards assessment. So let's talk about which projects undergo a preliminary review. You know that there is a wide variety of projects certified under Gold Standard. So if we're talking about standalone projects, each standalone project would have to undergo a preliminary review process. For programs of activities, the actual program of activity umbrella of projects has to undergo preliminary review to ensure that each project that is added under the program is also eligible in the future. There is particularities about what the fee includes in a program of activity. So there's one VPA, voluntary program activity, or CPA, certified project program activity. No, component program activity listed together with the POA. For all the other VPAs, please check the program of activity requirements because there's specific requirements depending on what kind of VPA or CPA we're talking about. Now, for projects that have transitioned from the clean development mechanism or are transitioning from the clean development mechanism, there is also a preliminary review process. However, it is quite different because these are projects that have already been registered under another climate standard and simply need to check if the additional Gold Standard requirements around stakeholder consultation and stakeholder engagement about safeguarding principles, etc., are also complied with. So there's different forms for that called the transition request form. And there's a form applicable to different types of projects. So in this session, we're going to focus on the preliminary review request form for other projects that are not transitioning from CDM. Now, what are the requirements for conducting a preliminary review? The first step, and you can find much more information on the SustainCERT knowledge database. The first step would be to create an account in the SustainCERT app if you don't have one yet. So for new project developers that have never worked with Gold Standard, you create an account with SustainCERT app. For project developers that already have other projects, you simply access your account and create the new project. Then you compile all the necessary documents, which include first the preliminary review request form, the project design document draft. Again, the project design does not need to be complete at this stage, but the more information you have, the better idea you would have of whether your design is adapted to the Gold Standard after the preliminary review stage. Then the local stakeholder consultation report, as the stakeholder consultation should be performed before applying for preliminary review. The cover letter that establishes the communication lines between Gold Standard and the project, the terms and conditions of using the Gold Standard that define the property on data, legal issues between the project and gold standard, etc. Very important document. And of course, the terms of use of the gold standard registry. There's quite a few more requirements for land use and forest projects, because in order to assess eligibility towards the gold standard, there would need to be a performance risk assessment and, of course, the geoinformation system layers that allow SustainCERT to assess the eligibility of afforestation, reforestation, or an agriculture project. Then, what is a process? The process starts with the project developer submitting the documents that we just talked about for review on the SustainCERT app. The project developer then books a review. Please note that there's at least 2 weeks of notice before a review can be booked. Sometimes there's more, depending on the kind of the number of projects that are applying for preliminary review. Then the project developer pays the preliminary review fee. Please note that according to the principles and requirements, a submission is only complete once this preliminary review fee is paid. And this is important because the date of submission defines many other things in the certification process, such as the applicability of methodologies, the applicability of certain documents, standard versions, etc. So this moment of payment of the preliminary review fee has become a very important milestone in the certification process. After this, SustainCERT picks up the review documents, lists any forward action requests if necessary. After reviewing all the documentation, all the answers provided by the project developer, and might provide some observations or clarifications that are indicative for the validation verification body and for the project developer to take into account in the next steps of the certification process. Now, the timelines. Until now, we had a timeline of 4 weeks or more, and sometimes this timeline would get extended because of several rounds of review of the preliminary review process. What we're aiming to do with this, with the preliminary review request form, is to have a timeline of 7 days for the preliminary review process for frequent project types such as renewable energy projects or frequent community services activities. But if a project is very complex and requires any changes to existing methodologies, or there are very few projects until now that have applied such a methodology, such as we're now in the very beginning of seeing transport projects or agriculture projects, land use and forest projects. For these kind of projects, preliminary review would take a longer time. It would take about 4 weeks or up to 4 weeks. Once the project is approved, it obtains a listed status on the Gold Standard Registry and can be found in the public search, together with the draft preliminary review request form, the stakeholder consultation report, and the draft design document. Now, what I would like to present to you now is the preliminary review request form. First of all, why do we even have one? And the reason for the preliminary review request form is that we would like to guide the project developer through the first stages of the project development process. We're very aware in the gold standard that until now, most of the project developers have worked with carbon markets for over 10 years and were perfectly capable of navigating the very complex maze of requirements, procedures, and templates. The market, though, is expanding, and we're very happy to see a lot of interest in mitigating climate change. And we would like to make sure that newcomers are also find it easy to navigate the first stages of the process. And therefore, we decided to improve the template and to make it not only a template, but also a guidance document where you go from step to step, a little bit like a game book, where you choose which pathway your project should take, which documents are applicable to it, which scenarios are applicable to it, and then answer the relevant questions to identify whether the project is eligible under gold standard or not. There are therefore references to all the key requirements, principles and requirements, sustainable development assessment, the safeguarding assessment, stakeholder consultation, activity requirements, and methodologies. And then there's also a checklist of all the key steps and documents that need to be uploaded together with the preliminary review request form. The point here is to streamline the preliminary review process and ensure the completeness of the submission. The more complete the submission to SustainCERT, the shorter the time for the answer from SustainCERT, and the better the idea of whether there's going to be any issues at validation and design certification stage. So this is why and how we created the preliminary review request form. And now what it contains. The first section is actually for SustainCERT. It should not be completed by the project developer, but it will remain there in the publicly disclosed document to capture the date of listing, to capture the decision and any forward action requests, so that the validation verification body can refer to this in a later stage. The second section of the document is the key project information document. It includes the preliminary review documents checklist, so which documents need to be uploaded on the SustainCERT app together with the preliminary review form. It includes questions that help position the project in the matrix of project types. So what standard does it apply? What scale it is? Is it individual or group project? What activity requirements might apply to it, methodology, which SDGs, etc. So in order for the reviewer to understand what project we're talking about and which requirements apply to the project, we can collect this key project information in the preliminary review request form. This is further explained in the project design document. But this key project information would provide a summary of that. That also helps then, let's say, buyers or anybody else that is interested in a project to just open this document and understand, oh, okay, so we're talking about this kind of project. The third thing that is contained in the second section of the document is a declaration by the project developer or representative that, first of all, ensures that the answers provided in this form are correct. And second, acknowledges the role of the preliminary review process, that this is not a certification step. It is simply for information, and yet it is an obligatory step in the certification process. Now, the third section is the one that I'm most excited about. And this is where we hope will streamline the preliminary review process the most. We have different subsections for each main document. For example, the Sustainable Development Assessment. There is a yes or no checklist on questions. For example, did you apply a gold standard approved SDG tool for SDG impact assessment? Yes or no? So this question leads the project developer to click on a link that takes them to the SDG tool. Once they fill out the tool and they're ready, they can click yes. Right? There's examples in this section, like how to link different monitoring parameters to different sustainable development goals. There's key requirements mentioned with a link to the actual document of things that project developers should think about when talking about sustainable development assessment. And this helps If you would read the principles and requirements document, there's so many requirements that you need to use at different stages of the project that it's very difficult to connect then these stages to these requirements. What we do in the preliminary review request form is to do the opposite. Okay, you're doing sustainable development assessment. Please take note of this specific requirement in the principles and requirements. And the same with the rules and references. So the rules and references tell you why this assessment is important, why this is part of the eligibility of the project, and also reference further information or further guidance that might be available. We hope that this form would be really useful for projects to navigate the first stages of project development, whether we're talking about experienced project developers or newcomers. The applicability is very important for current project developers. We published a document in December 2021, and it enters into force on the 8th of March, which is a week from now. We have published last week editorial changes in February 2021. So what you would find on the website is version 1.1 of the preliminary review request form. The changes were necessary to clarify a bit the language in a couple of the questions, but also to make proper reference to the newly published Sustainable Development Tool. And we will probably update this document, the preliminary review request form, with every new update to other relevant documents that are mentioned in the form. So please note which version that you're using when you apply for preliminary review, and try to use the most up-to-date one. It would be easier for you. So the preliminary review request form, as it is obligatory for use by all projects that are requesting preliminary review, except transitioning projects, on or after 8th of March 2022. As we said, the date of requesting counts as the date of payment of the preliminary review fee. And that is, for now, basically all I wanted to say about preliminary review and the preliminary review request form.